It was meant to be the perfect vacation for a family of four, soaking up the sun and enjoying the clear blue waters on a fancy Caribbean cruise. But one morning, everything changed. When they woke up, their 23-year-old daughter had mysteriously disappeared from the ship. The family panicked as the crew and police searched every corner of the boat, but there was no sign of her anywhere. Years later, some people said they saw the missing woman on a small Caribbean island. What happened to her? Why did she suddenly vanish? On March 21, 1998, 23-year-old Amy Lynn Bradley, along with her parents and brother, set off on a family trip from Chesterfield, Virginia, to Puerto Rico. They were preparing to embark on a cruise aboard the Rhapsody of the Seas for a week-long voyage through the Caribbean. This trip came as a surprise, spurred by her father Ron's excellent performance at work, which earned the family an all-expenses-paid vacation. Initially, Amy was hesitant to go. Although she was a strong swimmer, she harbored an unexplained fear of the sea and ships. However, with encouragement from her mother and brother, Brad, she eventually agreed to join the family on the trip. Born on May 12, 1974, Amy had just celebrated her 23rd birthday. Standing was in great physical shape and had a keen sense of fashion. Having lived in Chesterfield her whole life, she had excelled in both basketball and swimming, earning a full sports scholarship to a nearby university where she pursued a degree in sports studies. Upon graduation, she had become a certified lifeguard and physical education teacher. Just before the trip, she had received her degree and was planning to pursue a master's. She had also recently moved into her own apartment to start living independently. The cruise promised to be a relaxing getaway, with a route that departed from San Juan, Puerto Rico, and included stops in Aruba, Curaçao, and St. Martin before returning to Puerto Rico. The voyage was set to last 7 days. The Rhapsody of the Seas, a new luxury liner, was nearly 920 feet long and could accommodate around 2,000 passengers and 700 crew members. Though owned by a Florida-based company, the ship was registered in Norway. The cruise offered all the elements of a dream vacation: sun-soaked beaches, refreshing cocktails, and a variety of gourmet cuisine. However, this much-anticipated trip took a dark turn for Amy's family. On March 21st, the family flew to Puerto Rico and immediately boarded the luxurious cruise ship. Their cabin, located on the 8th deck on the starboard side, felt like a cozy hotel room, complete with a private balcony offering stunning ocean views. As the ship set sail that evening, excitement buzzed among the passengers, and Amy's father, Ron, attended a formal dinner with other award-winning employees. Meanwhile, Amy and her brother, Brad, took numerous photos around the ship. The following day, the ship docked in Aruba, and the Bradley family took the opportunity to explore the island. They bought local souvenirs before returning to the ship, which was scheduled to depart for Curaçao that evening. After returning, Amy and her mother visited the 4th deck, where professional photographers displayed pictures taken of the passengers. Amy specifically remembered having photos taken the night before, but couldn't find them among the displayed shots. She inquired with the photographer, who confirmed the pictures were taken but had mysteriously gone missing. He promised to reprint them the next day, leaving Amy and her mother wondering if someone had purchased the photos of her. Later, the family headed to the ship's music lounge on the 10th deck, where there was live music and entertainment, including a small singing and dancing troupe from Aruba. Curiously, some locals from Aruba had also boarded the ship, though they weren't performers or tourists. As the night progressed, Amy met a bassist at the party. It was clear that Amy had caught his attention, and they spent the evening chatting, drinking, and having fun. At around 1:30 a.m., Amy's parents returned to their cabin to sleep, while Amy and her brother stayed at the party. Brad eventually grew tired and headed back to their cabin at around 3:30 a.m. Shortly after, someone noticed Amy walking alone towards the elevator near the ballroom. It appeared she was also returning to her cabin, but that would be the last time anyone saw her. When Amy left the party, there were still about 30 to 40 people celebrating. According to the electronic lock records of the cabin door, she returned at around 3:40 a.m. By that time, her family was already asleep. Her parents vaguely recalled seeing her sitting on the lounge chair on the balcony. At 5 a.m., Ron woke up briefly as the ship was nearing its second stop, Curaçao. He noticed that Amy was still on the balcony, asleep on the lounge chair, with a pack of bluish cigarettes by her side. An hour later, at 6 a.m., Ron was awoken by the quiet sound of the cabin door closing. When he checked, Amy was no longer on the balcony, but her shoes remained there. It was clear that she had left the cabin barefoot, taking only the cigarettes and a lighter. Ron assumed she might have stepped out for a smoke or to take in the view of Curaçao's harbor. He quickly got dressed and headed to the upper deck, discovering that the ship had already docked. After searching the ship for over an hour, Ron couldn't find any sign of Amy. His anxiety grew and a sense of dread began to overwhelm him. Desperate, he sought out the ship's security manager for help. However, the manager didn't take the situation seriously, believing that Amy was probably somewhere on the ship, enjoying the view like many passengers who ventured out early to admire Curaçao's scenery. By 7 a.m., Ron returned to the cabin and woke up his wife and son. Their immediate reaction was that something terrible had happened. The three of them then split up to cover more ground, combing every deck of the ship in search of Amy. Ron even approached the captain, demanding that he prevent passengers from disembarking and issue a missing person alert. The captain, however, refused to halt the disembarkation, fearing it would cause panic. He did agree to a search of the ship, but stopped short of making an announcement. As passengers began to leave the ship, the family believed they had missed a crucial opportunity to find Amy. After what the crew described as a thorough search of the ship's 999 cabins, there was still no trace of her. The captain concluded that Amy might have fallen overboard, but her family vehemently rejected this theory, knowing that Amy, despite being a strong swimmer, was deeply afraid of the sea. The captain contacted the Dutch Antilles Coast Guard, which conducted a 2-day search without finding any clues. It was suggested that Amy's family disembark in Curaçao to continue searching, under the assumption that she might have left the ship. They followed this advice and contacted local authorities, including the Curaçao Police, the U.S. Embassy, and the FBI. The FBI promised assistance, but no one could arrive until the following day. Ron's family spent the entire day scouring Curaçao's streets and beaches, showing photos of Amy to anyone they encountered, but they found nothing. By the third day, the ship was preparing to depart for its next destination, St. Martin. Faced with a difficult decision, the family chose to remain in Curaçao, hoping to continue the search with the help of arriving FBI agents. Curaçao, a popular tourist destination in the Caribbean, is not only known for its stunning beaches but also as a hub for drug trafficking, money laundering, and human trafficking. The Bradley family began to suspect that Amy's disappearance might be linked to this darker side of the island. On Wednesday, March 25th, still with no leads, the family received a request from the FBI to meet in St. Martin. Despite the ship's U.S. ownership, it was registered in Norway, which meant Norwegian maritime law applied to Amy's case, not U.S. law. The Bradley family quickly realized that American authorities couldn't intervene unless they had permission from Norway. By Thursday, March 26th, 48 hours after Amy's disappearance, FBI agents and the family boarded the ship in St. Martin. The FBI found that the ship's previous search had been superficial, only covering public areas and some cabins. This time, the FBI conducted a thorough search, investigating every part of the ship, including distributing flyers and interviewing passengers. The investigation uncovered irregularities with the ship's photography services. Anyone could purchase photos of any passenger, raising suspicions about Amy's missing photos. The FBI focused on the bassist, who had been seen with Amy. Although his statements were inconsistent, he passed a lie detector test, and a search of his belongings yielded no evidence. He was eventually dismissed by the cruise line for fraternizing too closely with passengers. Despite the FBI's efforts, they ruled out foul play, accidental drowning, and murder. They identified several suspicious individuals and activities, but due to legal constraints in dealing with an international case, they were forced to halt their investigation. On March 28, 1998, the cruise ship returned to Puerto Rico, marking the end of what should have been a 7-day Caribbean adventure. While many passengers had likely enjoyed the trip, for Ron's family, it had turned into a nightmare. Their beloved Amy was missing, and the sense of loss was overwhelming. Soon after the ship docked, they flew back to the U.S., heartbroken and desperate for answers. Despite their devastation, Ron's family refused to give up. They launched a nationwide campaign to search for Amy, setting up a dedicated hotline and website to collect any relevant information. A $250,000 reward was also offered for any useful leads. Several Puerto Rican locals called in, claiming to have seen Amy. Ron shared these tips with the FBI, and even he and his son traveled back to Curaçao to follow some leads. Sadly, none of these efforts bore fruit. In addition to working with authorities, the Bradleys hired private investigators to conduct a thorough reinvestigation of the cruise ship. They even consulted psychics, hoping to find clues through supernatural means, but these too led nowhere. The family became convinced that Amy had been drugged during her interaction with the bassist, possibly in the early hours of that morning. They believed she had been taken to the lower levels of the ship, hidden in a laundry or garbage cart, and smuggled off the vessel via employee corridors. They also suspected that she may have witnessed something on board that she wasn't supposed to see. With the FBI's investigation stalling, the Bradleys began writing letters to congressional representatives, State Department officials, and even the president, firm in their belief that Amy had been kidnapped and was still alive. By June 1999, Amy was officially declared dead. The family then filed several lawsuits against the cruise line, including claims of defamation, negligent security, and emotional distress. However, the court dismissed all of the cases, stating that the family had only provided evidence that suited their narrative, and failed to show that Amy might have left the ship voluntarily in Curaçao. The judge felt the family was trying to steer the investigation towards a kidnapping conclusion. Despite these legal setbacks, the Bradleys continued their search. One lead came from a chef in Curaçao who claimed to have seen a girl matching Amy's description. The chef described Amy's tattoos in detail and even sang a song that Amy's mother used to sing to her as a child. Convinced that this was a legitimate lead, the family reported it to the local police. However, the authorities in Curaçao dismissed the tip, citing insufficient evidence. Another potential clue came from a U.S. Navy sailor who had met a woman at a local nightclub in Curaçao who claimed to be named Amy and begged him for help to leave the island. At the time, the sailor didn't recognize her as the missing person, and he had rejected her plea, later getting reprimanded for visiting a nightclub while on duty. When he saw Amy's picture in a magazine, he immediately contacted the Bradleys. Unfortunately, by the time the authorities checked the nightclub, it had burned down. 3 months later, a man identifying himself as Frank Jones, a retired U.S. Special Forces veteran, contacted Ron's family. He claimed to specialize in rescuing victims of human trafficking and offered to help find Amy. Desperate for any lead, the Bradleys agreed to work with him, paying him a substantial fee. Jones sent them a photograph of a young woman sitting on a beach, her face obscured by a hat, but her tattoos were visible and matched those of Amy. Convinced that this was their daughter, Ron's family paid an additional $100,000 for the next phase of the rescue operation. Having exhausted their savings, they borrowed money to raise the amount. The family flew to Florida, waiting anxiously in a hotel for news from Frank. Meanwhile, Ron's boss, who had loaned the family a private plane for a quick return to Curaçao, grew suspicious. He secretly hired a friend to investigate Frank's activities. It didn't take long to discover that Jones was running a scam. There was no sign of Amy on the island, and the photo had been staged with hired models. In total, Frank had swindled the Bradleys out of over $200,000. He later confessed that the tattoos in the photo were fake. In February 2002, Frank Jones was charged with fraud and sentenced to 5 years in prison with an order to repay all the money. The chef's lead had also proven to be a fabrication, aimed at earning a profit from the Bradley family's grief. The chef received $8,000 from the family and was later charged with fraud. Despite these devastating setbacks, the Bradleys remained resolute in their search for Amy. In interviews, they expressed their unwavering hope, stating that as long as there was a glimmer of hope, they would keep looking. "If it were your child, wouldn't you do the same?" they often asked. In 2005, 7 years after Amy's disappearance, a photo surfaced on an adult website that bore a striking resemblance to her. After extensive analysis by FBI experts, it was determined that the woman in the photo was likely Amy. However, they were unable to trace the website's location, and the lead went cold. Later that year, a woman named Judy was on vacation in Barbados. While using a public restroom, she overheard a man threatening a woman in a nearby stall, urging her to engage in sex work. Judy then saw the woman crying quietly by the sink. The woman, who appeared to be in her 30s, claimed she was from Virginia and called herself Amy. Minutes later, a man entered the restroom and forcibly took the woman away. Judy reported the incident to the police and helped create a sketch of the man. In 2006, the International Cruise Victims Association was founded to support those who had suffered injustices aboard cruise ships. The founder of the International Cruise Victims Association, who tragically lost his own daughter during a Caribbean cruise in 2004, made it clear, "Our goal is not to target these cruise companies, but to ensure that crimes committed on cruise ships are properly addressed and that offenders are held accountable." According to the International Cruise Victims Association, between 1995 and 2012, 170 people disappeared from cruise ships in just 7 years. In 2005 alone, there were 50 reported criminal incidents on cruises, yet only 4 resulted in convictions. On July 27, 2010, President Obama signed the Cruise Vessel Security and Safety Act into law. This legislation mandated that all criminal activities involving U.S. citizens on cruise ships be reported to the FBI. It also granted U.S. law enforcement greater jurisdiction over cruise ships operating in international waters. The new law introduced a variety of safety measures. It set specific height requirements for cruise ship railings, mandated that every cabin be equipped with peepholes, required the installation of surveillance cameras in all public areas and decks, and called for professional training for security personnel. Despite all the legal changes and improvements in cruise ship safety, Ron's family has never given up their search for Amy. They continue their tireless efforts, holding on to the hope that one day they will find her. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.
Every day we coexist with evil. We witness the darkest side of human behavior. The suffering caused by one individual to others is something inherent in our society. As dedicated investigators of the criminal world, we're on a mission to uncover the most shocking crimes and get inside the minds of those who commit them. I am Lucas, and today I bring you another unreal true crime. Tair Rada's story. Tair Rada was the pride and joy of Shemuel and Ilana Rada, inhabitants of the peaceful Katzrin, a short distance from Haifa in Israel. She grew up with her older siblings, Roy and Ohad, who were always watchful and caring towards her. Tair's vivacious spirit, love for the arts, and talent in dance made her stand out. Her friends fondly referred to her as their guiding star. Naturally, Tair's charisma meant she led and others were inclined to follow. Though her beauty and wit sometimes brewed jealousy among other young girls, any rifts were generally short-lived since many of these girls had been friends from childhood. Tair's daily life included attending a local high school, and like many kids in her neighborhood, she preferred walking to school. It was her routine to call her mother upon reaching home, a reassuring habit for the family. However, on the fateful day of December 6, 2006, things took a turn. Skipping her last class to mingle with her friends, Tair was her usual self, blending in and enjoying the camaraderie. Around 1:20 p.m., she got really thirsty, so she went to the school building to get a drink. Some younger students recall seeing her on the floor where the 10th grade classrooms were located. However, at night, when the usual call didn't come that evening, her mother grew anxious. Initially dismissing it as a simple delay or a visit to a friend's house, worry soon set in when Tair was nowhere to be found. Her family tried calling her many times on her phone, but she didn't pick up. This made them worry and feel very sad. Ilana's motherly instincts screamed that something was wrong. Without a second thought, she mobilized a search party made up of relatives, friends, acquaintances, and even strangers, all rallying to find Ta'ir. Shemuel, in sheer desperation, joined the search, navigating through the cold, dark streets. The level of distress and panic among Ta'ir's family was palpable. Nobody had seen her since she went into the school earlier, so the police were quickly sent to the school to start looking for her. At around 7 p.m., a group mainly comprising the Rada family's close circle ventured into the school. They searched through the dark hallways and rooms until they got to the girls' restroom for 10th graders. There, they found something unsettling. One of the restroom stalls had its door locked. They saw feet inside, but when they called out, there was a spooky silence, and nobody responded. They used a nearby stall to help them look over, and what they saw was beyond belief. Ta'ir was lying there, not alive, and it was clear that something terrible had happened to her. The walls and floor showed signs of something really scary. She had injuries that were proof of a violent attack, and it was clear that her last moments were filled with fear. The shocking discovery deeply shocked the whole community. Shemuel, who was in a lot of pain, couldn't get close to the crime scene because of how horrifying it was. Ta'ir's brother was so upset that he had to be held back. Everyone in the community was really upset and angry. They couldn't understand how something so terrible could happen in a place where children were supposed to be safe. Parents were worried about their kids' safety and talked about whether it was safe to send them back to school. For a while, the school became a place where a crime had happened, and all the normal classes and activities had to stop. People were confused because the police were searching in a wider area instead of concentrating on the school, which is what the locals thought they would do. The police were talking to people to find out where Ta'ir had last been. 2 people who knew her said they saw her go up the school stairs by herself, without anyone following her. Many students reported being in the restroom around the same time frame as Ta'ir, with several pointing out peculiar occurrences. In the span of 40 minutes, an estimated 10 to 12 girls used the restroom. Yet the police chose to interview only a handful. What struck investigators as particularly odd was how amidst this constant traffic, no one seemed to have witnessed or heard the violent act that took Ta'ir's life. Some students noted anomalies, like the presence of an unfamiliar girl with curly hair. One of Ta'ir's friends, who was confident she knew most of the student body, couldn't recall seeing this girl either before or after that day. Although the mystery girl wore a school shirt, she was perceived as a new student. A specific student claimed to have observed 2 sets of feet in the stall where Ta'ir was later found. Ta'ir's recognizable sneakers and another pair of youth-sized All-Stars. She, however, dismissed this observation, attributing a foul odor in the restroom as a reason to leave quickly. Another student, after knocking on the stall's door, was informed it was occupied. The police seemed especially interested in discerning the gender of this voice. Even though she repeatedly mentioned it was a female's voice, she felt the officers were unsatisfied with her response. With the whole community offering their help and sympathy, the Rada family was going through a very sad and difficult time, trying to understand that they had lost Ta'ir. Haim Sadovsky, a private investigator, was really moved by Ta'ir's case, especially because his own daughter was the same age as Ta'ir. He got in touch with the Rada family and offered to use his skills to help them. They were thankful and told him everything they could. Ilana mentioned a peculiar observation. When a group of Ta'ir's friends visited to offer condolences, 2 girls seemed to be having a secretive conversation, prompting Ilana to think they might be withholding crucial information. Haim investigated further, finding numerous inconsistencies in their police statements. Interestingly, one of Ta'ir's classmates went to look for her bag in class, but didn't find it strange that Ta'ir wasn't there. Another classmate mentioned that Ta'ir seemed unusually distant during her favorite class, theater. When her teacher asked what was wrong, Ta'ir's response was really unsettling. "Because I fear death." This made a lot of people wonder if Ta'ir had a feeling that something bad was going to happen to her. When they looked into it more, Ta'ir's friends shared a really disturbing story. They talked about an 18-year-old from Tiberias named Avi who seemed to be fixated on Ta'ir. He kept calling and texting her a lot, and he even made a really scary threat. He said he would harm her if she didn't agree to be in a romantic relationship with him. Avi made Tair even more anxious by insisting on meeting her, and when she said no, he threatened her with harm again. But upon police investigation, there was no evidence to corroborate any interactions between Tair and this supposed stalker, Avi. This brought up an important question. Why would Tair's friends come up with such a story? Could it be a way to distract from something else? Haim Sadovsky, during his investigation, reasoned that the extreme violence inflicted upon Tair didn't seem characteristic of an adult assailant. An adult wouldn't need to exert such brutality to overpower a young girl. He postulated that the culprits were likely two individuals, roughly Tair's age and stature. Aside from the two girls who were previously suspected, there was another person Tair knew who caught their attention. This girl was similar to Tair in terms of looks and intelligence, but they had a noticeable dislike for each other. Tair had told her mom about her concerns regarding this person at the beginning of the school year. What's interesting is that this girl left town not long after Tair's death, and when the authorities asked her about students leaving town, she avoided giving a straight answer. Despite initial suspicions pointing towards Tair's classmates, the investigation did not yield any DNA, fingerprints, or shoe imprints as evidence. Authorities then shifted their focus to a gardener employed at the school. His presence in the teacher's lounge on the fateful day, combined with his seemingly disoriented demeanor, as noted by the school psychologist, made him a person of interest. But the school's gardener had a strong alibi that made it hard for the police to connect him to the crime. Even though the psychologist's statements seemed believable, the police were stuck with a lot of uncertainties and not enough answers. Then, in a surprising turn of events, the investigation started looking at someone else who looked very much like the school's gardener. This led investigators to believe that the school psychologist could have mistakenly identified the two. Roman Zadorov, a construction worker at the school, found himself under the investigative lens shortly after Tair's murder. A recent immigrant from Ukraine, Zadorov had relocated to Israel 2 years prior and was earning a living through miscellaneous construction jobs. He had met his wife, Olga, back in Ukraine, and the two were high school sweethearts. His family made the move to Israel, where he was then employed as a handyman for a contractor. Due to visa restrictions, Zadorov wasn't legally allowed to work, so he was compensated in cash. At his wife's urging, Zadorov had initiated the process of acquiring Israeli citizenship during the time of his arrest. He wasn't fluent in Hebrew and mostly communicated in Russian. The police's suspicion was aroused when Zadorov revealed that he had discarded the clothes he wore on the day of Tair's murder. During the long hours of his interrogation, while denying any involvement in the crime, investigators scoured his residence. They unearthed pornographic content on his computer, which, upon closer inspection, involved young but legally aged women. Further amplifying suspicion was Zadorov's collection of knives, especially given the nature of Tair's injuries. Zadorov's detention was based on the circumstantial evidence of the knives and the school psychologist's potentially mistaken testimony. Adding to the tension was the media's reporting of unverified information, claims that Zadorov's DNA matched that found at the crime scene. This, however, was not accurate. While DNA samples were indeed sent to the U.S. for testing, the results were pending. The interrogation tactics took a contentious turn. Authorities missiled Zadorov, stating that his DNA was present at the crime scene in an attempt to extract a confession. Although Zadorov initially resisted, he was pressured into thinking the evidence was undeniable. He speculated that perhaps he inadvertently stepped in blood he had noticed in the school's male restroom, thus explaining any potential trace. After this grueling questioning, he was placed in a holding cell, suggesting further developments in the case were imminent. Something surprising happened. Zadorov's cellmate turned out to be working with the police. They promised him a lot of money, and even more if he could get Zadorov to admit to the crime. But Zadorov didn't give in. He kept saying he didn't do it, especially because he had just become a father and didn't want to lose his family. But after more than a week, the informant tried a different approach. He made Zadorov believe that the evidence against him was really strong, and his best chance to get a shorter prison sentence would be to admit to a lesser crime like manslaughter. That way, he might spend less time in jail. Under significant pressure, and with the informant's guidance, Zadorov was led to believe that he might have acted in a fit of uncontrollable rage, a side effect of feeling marginalized as an immigrant in Israel. Zadorov started doubting his own memory, pondering over past incidents where he acted out and later had no recollection of the event. Eventually, he mused, "Maybe I did kill her. If everything points towards me, perhaps I did it." Yet inconsistencies remained. Zadorov recalled working late on the day of Tair's murder and wasn't covered in any blood. His discarded trousers, which had been a point of suspicion, were thrown away due to their uncomfortable fit, not any purported bloodstains. Without Zadorov knowing, his talks in the prison cell were being recorded. Taking advantage of Zadorov's growing uncertainty, the investigators convinced him to act out what happened during a crime at the school, and they recorded everything on video. The authorities thought this was the proof they needed. Later, in a press conference, they said they had caught Tair's killer and suggested that a small argument over cigarettes had made Zadorov react violently. However, Tair's family and friends challenged this narrative. They desired more concrete forensic evidence. They felt in their core that Zadorov wasn't the actual perpetrator. Their skepticism was compounded by the police's claim regarding the cigarette altercation. Tair was known to detest smoking and was unlikely to insult anyone, especially someone older than her. Tair's mother, Ilana Rada, was persistent in her belief that the real killer came from Tair's circle of friends. Over the years, she gathered information, growing increasingly convinced that there were unsettling dynamics within Tair's close group of friends, leading up to her tragic death. Ilana, while digging deeper into the school's culture, found some disturbing information. She thought that a lot of students might be part of a satanic group, and she started thinking that Tair's death could have been a part of a ritual. As the investigation continued, Roman Zadorov's wife got in touch with their legal team. After they did their own investigation, they came to the conclusion that Zadorov was being blamed for something he didn't do and had been manipulated into confessing. Zadorov quickly recanted his confession, yet remained incarcerated awaiting his trial, which commenced on July 2, 2007. The prosecution's narrative took a dramatic turn. They suggested that traumatic childhood experiences from Ukraine were triggered when Zadorov began working at a school, leading to an explosive reaction when provoked by the students. They also misleadingly stated that DNA evidence tied Zadorov to the crime scene, even though the results from the U.S. had not been received. The defense, however, dismantled the prosecution's claims one by one. Despite the crime scene being dense with various pieces of evidence like blood, hair, and footprints, not a single trace linked Zadorov. His residence was scored extensively, even his washing machine, but yielded no ties to the crime. 3 hairs on Tair's body matched 3 different individuals, none being Zadorov. 60 fingerprints found at the site didn't match him either. Moreover, Zadorov's timeline for the day provided him with a reliable alibi. His whereabouts were confirmed by various people at different times, ensuring he was nowhere near the crime scene during the estimated time of Tair's death. The prosecution relied a lot on Zadorov's confession, even though it had many mistakes. When they reenacted the crime, it didn't match up, and it seemed like the police were telling him what to say. They said Zadorov knew things only the real killer would know, but the defense argued that the investigators actually told him all those exclusive details. When Zadorov was asked to show how certain parts of the crime happened, he kept getting it wrong, and the officers had to help him until his answers matched the evidence. Furthermore, the nature of Tair's injuries suggested they were inflicted by a left-handed individual, while Zadorov was right-handed. The multiple inconsistencies in Zadorov's confession raised significant doubts about its authenticity and the integrity of the investigation. Zadorov's confession had a lot of inconsistencies, and the defense team pointed them out clearly. He said he used a knife with a smooth blade, but the forensic evidence showed that the weapon had a serrated edge. To make things more confusing, during the reenactment of the school, Zadorov took the officers to the wrong restroom. The actual crime scene was easy to spot because there was still crime scene tape there, which was a pretty big mistake. Also, when Zadorov showed how he escaped from the restroom cubicle, it didn't match the evidence at the crime scene. He said he jumped over the cubicle door, but the footprints suggested that the killer climbed over the neighboring cubicle instead. Prosecutors argued that a bloody footprint at the scene matched Zadorov's specific shoe brand. However, this claim lost weight given that no blood was found on his actual shoes. Considering the violent nature of the crime, it seemed improbable that he could be present in the cubicle without his shoes being splattered with blood. Despite these glaring inconsistencies and the lack of concrete evidence linking him to the crime, Zadorov was found guilty and handed a life sentence. The court labeled his statements as deceitful, adding charges of obstructing a police investigation. After the trial, Tair's mother initially believed Zadorov was the perpetrator, swayed by his confession and the supposed footprint evidence. Yet, in the ensuing months, her conviction wavered. Ilana Rada soon went public with her distrust in the legal system and voiced suspicions towards students at Tair's school, even suggesting a satanic ritual might be involved. Refusing to accept the verdict, Zadorov's defense team remained undeterred in their pursuit of justice. Further muddying the case's credibility was a scandal involving the presiding judge, who later resigned due to charges of indecent offenses against minors. Public sentiment started to shift towards Zadorov, with many voicing their support for his innocence and demanding justice for Tair. In 2016, a documentary, Shadow of Truth, spotlighted the case and introduced a harrowing confession from an anonymous individual. He recounted a chilling admission from his ex-girlfriend, referred to as AK, who confessed to Tair's murder. This former student of the same high school confessed to wearing the school's uniform, lying in wait, and killing Tair in a ritualistic manner. This confession eerily aligned with earlier police testimonies from a student. Ak's backstory further darkened this narrative. She had a traumatic childhood, which included witnessing extreme violence and being concealed in a wolf's corpse for warmth. These experiences led her to have disturbing fantasies about violence and blood, to the point where she became obsessed with them. After Tair's murder, AK supposedly told her lover all the gruesome details of the crime, even showing them her blood-soaked clothes and the murder weapon. She went into great detail about what she did and what happened afterward, and it strangely matched what investigators had already found. Bringing back these unsettling claims and stories only added to the complexity and uncertainty of the case. In the dark aftermath of Tair's murder, AK stayed close to the lifeless body, hiding until it was safe to leave. She managed to slip away without anyone noticing, changing out of her blood-stained clothes and getting clean ones before making her escape. Once she got home, she cleaned herself up and disappeared from everyone's radar. Roman Zadorov's defense team was eager to probe deeper into the account, relayed by AK's ex-boyfriend. They subjected him to 3 lie detector tests, all of which he passed without any signs of deceit. This prompted the police to arrest AK, a striking blonde woman who vehemently denied any involvement in Tair's killing. AK shifted the blame to her former lover, accusing him of both harboring bloody fantasies and physically assaulting her. Things took a really unsettling turn when AK, who was on house arrest, tried to harm her current boyfriend. When he rejected her, an intoxicated AK threatened him with a piece of broken glass. Luckily, people nearby stopped her from carrying out the attack. When the police arrested her, AK suddenly had a scary change of heart and confirmed the horrifying things her ex-boyfriend had told them before. Even though AK was found unfit to go to trial for the attempted murder and was sent to a mental health facility, no formal charges were filed against her. On the other hand, Her ex-boyfriend had to deal with charges of obstructing justice and indecent assault while he was in prison. While he was behind bars, the authorities made him a proposition. If he took back what he had said about AK's involvement in Tair's murder, they would drop his charges. He strongly and dramatically refused, even threatening to take his own life, while insisting that AK was responsible for Tair's tragic death. The tragic murder of Tair Rada not only took away a young, promising life, but also shattered the lives of those who loved her. The passing of Shemuel Rada, Tair's father, in January 2016, further added to the family's anguish. During Shemuel's final farewell, Ilana read his heart-wrenching words, calling Shemuel a king soon to be reunited with his queen. Tair underlined the depths of her pain. And amidst her own overwhelming grief, she expressed her own yearning to join them. Yet, the story continued to unfold. The discovery of new forensic evidence in 2018 threw a wrench into the case's perceived conclusions. The matching DNA of a hair found on Tair's body to the man who had earlier made revelations about AK muddied the waters even more. It raised pressing questions. Was he the true perpetrator, or had he been speaking the truth throughout? His proximity to AK during the murder, and the fact that criminals often immerse themselves in investigations added layers of complexity. In 2019, Zadorov's attorney Yoram Halevi filed a request with the Supreme Court for a trial, claiming the existence of a lot of new evidence that proves unequivocally that Zadorov did not murder the deceased and could not have murdered the deceased. In a dramatic ruling in perhaps the most famous murder case in Israeli history, Roman Zadorov was acquitted on March 2023 of the 2006 murder of a 13-year-old schoolgirl that horrified the nation, in a retrial that overturned previous convictions that saw him serve more than a decade behind bars after being sentenced to life. The panel of 3 judges at the Nazareth District Court announced a 2-1 decision to exonerate Zadorov, who burst into tears and later said, "The truth triumphed. I am happy. I was confined to my home. Now I will take my children for a stroll." Judges Asher Kula and Danny Sarfati acquitted Zadorov, while the third judge, Tamer Nissim Shai, ruled that he was guilty. The verdict is some 700 pages long. A representative of the state prosecutors in the case said her team would study the verdict and then decide whether to appeal the acquittal to the Supreme Court. At the end of the verdict reading, Judge Kula turned to Ilana Rada, the victim's mother. "We tried to solve the mystery, but it is possible that Tair took her secret to the grave," he said. Ilana Rada answered, "At last, after 16 years of lies, justice was served. The war is just beginning. This is a cover-up by the prosecution. The prosecutors of the State of Israel murdered my daughter," she added, reiterating her past accusations that the poor investigative work and alleged framing of Zadorov had been tantamount to murdering her daughter all over again. While at the moment no one has been charged for Tair's murder, we hope it will happen in a near future. For more heart-rending tales and true story crimes, remember to subscribe and like. Stay respectful in the comments, especially considering the grieving families. Until next time on Unreal True Crime, stay safe and good night. Every day we coexist with evil. We witness the darkest side of human behavior. The suffering caused by one individual to others is something inherent in our society. As dedicated investigators of the criminal world, we're on a mission to uncover the most shocking crimes and get inside the minds of those who commit them. I am Lucas, and today I bring you another Unreal True Crime. The case of Leah Sousa. On June 7, 1977, the state of Ontario, Canada, witnessed the birth of Leah Sousa. Leah's life began with her strong and determined mother, Laura Sousa, who, despite being a single parent, left no stone unturned in ensuring her daughter's well-being. For a considerable time, their world was just the two of them, journeying through life's highs and lows together. As time unfolded, Laura introduced Leah to her new baby brother, Michael. The identity of their father remains undisclosed to the public. While some believe that a father figure was missing from their lives, the addition of Michael brought a sense of completeness to their family. Living in Cumberland Beach, Ontario, a quaint region about 2 hours away from Toronto, the Sousas had a humble abode with a combined living and kitchen area and a single bedroom. But this didn't deter Leah's spirit. She grew into a radiant young girl with a lively sense of humor and zest for life. Leah's academic achievements and her roles as a doting sister and daughter made her family immensely proud. At the age of 13, the Sousa family decided to visit Laura's sister, taking a rejuvenating 6-week summer break. With the Canadian school year commencing the Tuesday after Labor Day, they were soon back in Cumberland Beach, gearing up for the upcoming academic year. As the 1990 Labor Day weekend approached, Leah was eagerly preparing for her impending high school journey. On the night of September 1, while she rested on the couch, Laura and baby Michael slept peacefully in the bedroom. But that tranquility was shattered when, between 1:30 and 3:00 a.m., an unknown individual forcibly entered their home. Initially, the intruder brutally attacked Laura, using a metal object to inflict severe head injuries. He then turned his attention to Leah, assaulting her inside the house before dragging her to the backyard for further violence. The following morning, a friend of Leah's grew concerned after failing to reach her by phone. She decided to check on her, cycling over to the Sousa residence. The horrific sight she discovered was beyond comprehension. Leah's lifeless body lay in the backyard amidst a scene of devastation. The police were immediately alerted, and upon arrival, they found Laura grievously injured but alive. The silver lining amidst the tragedy was that young Michael remained untouched and unaware of the nightmare that had taken place. Laura was rushed to a Toronto-based hospital, where she spent 3 challenging weeks recuperating under tight security, fearing the perpetrator might return. The extent of her injuries required multiple surgeries, leading to the insertion of metal implants in her skull and cheek. One eye was severely damaged, resulting in lasting issues like impaired vision, dizziness, and diminished hearing. The brutal attack on Leah and her mother, who miraculously survived, profoundly shook both law enforcement and the residents of the rural community. In a place where people once led peaceful lives, leaving doors and windows open and letting children cycle freely without any fear, panic began to permeate the air. Parents became hesitant to let their children play outdoors, preferring to keep them close and in sight. Locking doors, securing windows, and keeping weapons nearby for self-defense became commonplace. In fact, out of sheer fear of a nocturnal assault, many residents started keeping a weapon or tool close to their beds. The palpable fear was evident on the faces of the community members. Investigators tirelessly worked to shed light on the events and identify potential suspects. Even though various samples were collected from the crime scene and inside the home, they couldn't find the assailant's DNA. Neither the weapon used in the crime nor the bloodied clothing the perpetrator wore during the attack was ever found. One key clue emerged: a footprint from a size 9 or 10 Nike tennis shoe made of leather. It was believed that Laura might have seen the attacker, but due to her injuries, she could not recall any events from that night. Investigators theorized that the individual who took Leah's life might have been familiar with the family and their vulnerabilities, noting their secluded living area and the absence of a male figure in the household, a single mother with an infant and a teenage daughter. Furthermore, detectives hypothesized that the attacker knew the region well, possibly being a resident or a frequent visitor, and was aware that the family was alone that particular night. One person of interest identified was Brian Timothy Elson from a nearby town. 4 months after Leah's tragic end, Brian took the life of 17-year-old Sandra Bannister in a place less than 13 kilometers from where the Sousa family lived. While Brian denied any involvement, the police suspected he was in Cumberland Beach on the night of the assault on the Sousa household. However, after questioning, he was released. He was never charged for Leah's murder, but pleaded guilty to manslaughter in Sandra's case, serving only 6 years in prison. After his release, due to concerns about his potential threat, the courts allowed the police to monitor his movements for 3 years, though this led to no further developments. As the authorities persisted in their investigations, Laura grappled with the gaps in her memory. Eager to recall the events of that fateful night, she tried various methods, including hypnosis and the controversial use of sodium pentothal, commonly known as truth serum. However, these attempts were in vain. Later, she turned to a renowned expert in brain science in Ontario. He attempted to stimulate Laura's damaged right brain hemisphere with magnetic fields to retrieve memories. Sadly, this effort also failed. He explained that human memories don't instantly solidify. Experiences take 20 to 30 minutes to permanently store in our brains. Unfortunately, during Laura's attack, this critical window was lost. He compared it to shutting down a computer without saving, suggesting that the memory might be lost forever, a heartbreaking outcome for Laura. In 2008, Ontario Provincial Police launched a billboard campaign along the highway near the Sousa residence, seeking new leads on Leah's case. This initiative yielded some promising testimonials. That same year, an intriguing tip led to an extensive search for the murder weapon on a wooded property in Cumberland Beach. However, the search came up empty, and Leah's case remained unresolved. In 2010, marking the 20th anniversary of the crime, the news program ran a feature on Leah's case. During their investigation, they found out that Brian's grandmother, a person of significant interest in the case due to her association with another similar attack, lived on the same street as the Sousa at the time of the incident. Brian was reportedly staying with her during that period. When a reporter located Brian at his home and questioned him about the assault leading to Leah's death, he denied any involvement. He claimed he was at a party in another town that night, where 60 witnesses could confirm his alibi. Over the decades since the murder, more than 1,500 people have been interviewed by the police. The quest for answers in Leah's tragic case continues. On one occasion, Laura spoke to the media, expressing her growing concerns that the case might never be solved. However, she maintained hope that one day she would come to know what transpired and why. The grieving mother pleaded with the community not to forget her daughter, even though she couldn't remember the events of that fateful night. The haunting memories continued to torment her, and she wasn't the only one scared by the tragic events of the summer night in 1990. Officers who investigated Leah's case, along with the journalists who covered it, acknowledged the horror that continued to grip them. By 2020, an investigator of the Ontario Provincial Police, the last in a series of investigators who had been on the case since Labor Day 1990, described the brutality as off the charts. He stated that both mother and daughter, deep in sleep, stood no chance against the attacker as they were ambushed and severely beaten. At that point, he revealed that the police believed a pipe or an iron wrench might have been the weapon used by the assailant. Yet they held back further investigative details to avoid jeopardizing the case. Regrettably, as the years since Leah's assault and the severe injuries inflicted on her mother Laura passed, the mystery of that night remained unsolved. More than 2 decades after the incident, the police reiterated that there were individuals who had information about the events and could potentially help solve the case. Despite a reward offer of $50,000 for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the perpetrator, that crucial piece of evidence never materialized. Still, they encouraged anyone who believed they had even the slightest information to come forward. Jim Van Allen, a criminal profiler with the Ontario Provincial Police, had studied around 850 fatal assaults before retiring in 2010. He dedicated significant years of his career trying to understand the motives behind heinous crimes and how to prevent them. When discussing Leah's case, he stated that while all violent deaths are tragic, some, like Leah's, are unforgettable. To Jim, the crime scene, which looked like a dollhouse in a tidy 60 square meter space without a basement, suggested that the attack was personal and intimate. Given that the family had only recently moved in and only locals knew they were home, he surmised that the aggressor was local and likely acted alone. In Jim's analysis, the intruder, equipped with a metal tool to break a window pane, likely had a sinister plan for the night. The level of violence exhibited indicated the act wasn't just a random outburst, but rather a manifestation of deep-seated sadism. Jim hypothesized that the assailant, already predisposed to violence, might have been at a personal breaking point, possibly under the influence and driven by a lifetime of resentments. He pondered if the man had a recent argument or felt particularly humiliated that day, suggesting past humiliations could have acted as a trigger for his rage. The profiler believed that the attacker might have known Laura and been interested in her. However, as a single mother, she would have been out of his league, like many other women. Jim's analysis suggested that while the intruder was likely known in the community, he wasn't particularly well liked, leading women to instinctively fear him. From Jim's assessment, while criminals typically flee their localities after committing heinous acts, he felt Leah's assailant might have remained nearby. Perhaps he cleaned his stained clothes and discarded the metallic instrument. The attacker's potential financial constraints and limited resources might have dictated this choice. Though not exceptionally astute, the culprit had the cunning to remain silent. In Jim's professional estimation, this person showed no regret for Leah's untimely death and likely felt indifferent about Laura's fortunate survival. But all these speculations and years of persistent investigation couldn't bring them any closer to the elusive perpetrator. In a twist in 2014, Barry Rule, an ex-officer of the Ontario Provincial Police with 3 decades of service, unveiled a book named A Viable Suspect: Multiple Murders and the Limits of a Police Force in Canada's Most Noted Unsolved Mystery. Barry's narrative raised suspicions about a serial criminal, dubbed Larry Talbot in his writings, connecting him to Leah's demise and other similar incidents in southwest Ontario. A personal encounter with this man named Larry in 1971 was recounted by Barry, wherein Larry trespassed and assaulted his fiancée. This attack was thwarted by Barry, who noticed the intruder's method of entry, breaking a rear window, resembled the approach at the Sousa residence. Larry, known as a traveling salesman in southwest Ontario, had his vehicle inspected, revealing a rape kit. Yet, regardless of Barry's insights into recurring patterns, Larry escaped intense scrutiny and passed away without ever being a legally recognized suspect. Even as Barry's book garnered attention, it didn't decisively resolve the cases hinting at Larry's involvement. Commemorating the 25th year of Leah's tragic end in 2015, Laura echoed sentiments of profound sorrow and exasperation, mourning the stolen potential of Leah's life. Investigators, over the years, left no stone unturned, pursuing leads, deploying multimedia investigations, revisiting evidence, and meticulously studying the comprehensive case files, among the most voluminous in police records. With the belief that someone local held the key to unlocking Leah's murder mystery, the police broadcasted a plea for information, spotlighting a $50,000 reward. Leah's mother lamented that even after years, she couldn't recollect the events of that devastating night. The knowledge that clues about the identity of the assailant responsible for Leah's tragic end were locked away in her memory was tormenting. Driving past the house became a somber task for many in the community. Paul Peden spoke about the profound impact this incident had on their lives. Even though he never knew Leah personally, the chilling details of her fate left him and his peers deeply shaken. Parents became overly cautious, restricting their children's outdoor activities. In a time without the rapid information spread of social media, whispers of fear propagated through the community. A new detective took over the case in 2019, and he has been diligently collaborating with experts from similar past cases. The case file, vast and complex, demanded exhaustive scrutiny to uncover any overlooked evidence. Though he didn't divulge specifics on whether they believed a single individual or multiple were involved, he emphasized the continual re-examination of evidence from 1990, thanks to modern forensic methods. Even after over 30 years, the brutal demise of Leah Suso remains an unresolved mystery. The collective efforts of the community and law enforcement have yet to bring the perpetrator to justice. This harrowing case serves as a grim reminder to the community about the imperativeness of vigilance and unity. Authorities, meanwhile, are unwavering in their quest for justice. Leah's memory remains etched in the community, continually underscoring the importance of justice and safety for all. That concludes today's narration. Your support is immensely appreciated. If you resonate with this content, please subscribe and share. This was another episode of Unreal True Crime. Until next time. The case of Jessica Gutierrez. Jessica Gutierrez, warmly known as Jessie by her family, was born on December 3, 1981, in the United States. She was the youngest amongst her 3 siblings. The family lived in a modest mobile home located in the rural area of South Carolina. In 1983, the tranquility was disrupted when Jessica's parents divorced. The children were left in the full custody of their mother, Deborah, while David Gutierrez, their father, moved to Mexico, maintaining a transient lifestyle between there and California. Following the divorce, Deborah worked diligently, finding employment at the United States Postal Service to meet the needs of her family, ensuring their well-being despite the challenges of raising 4 children alone. In June of 1986, Deborah found herself entangled with a man whose behavior grew progressively controlling and problematic, exacerbated by his increasing alcohol consumption. Eventually, his behavior reached a tipping point, leading to his expulsion from Deborah's life and home. However, Deborah's hope for respite was short-lived as her life plunged into further darkness. On June 5, 1986, a seemingly typical early summer day unfolded in South Carolina. The weather was pleasant, with temperatures hovering around 30 degrees Celsius, clouds ornamenting the sky. The family spent their day indulging in outdoor activities and nurturing familial bonds. The day concluded with Deborah preparing sandwiches for dinner and painting Jessica's nails before the children were put to bed. Jessica, maintaining her usual habits, requested to sleep in her mother's bed, a request granted by Deborah. However, when her elder brother experienced discomfort and pain later in the night, Deborah allowed him to sleep in her bed, relocating Jessica to the room at the hallway's end beside her sister, Becky. The following morning, Deborah awoke to a scene of subtle chaos, marking the inception of her ordeal. The front door was ajar, the family dog wandering restlessly, and a set of curtains lay on the floor, with the mosquito net appearing to be forcibly removed. Jessica was missing. Her absence was accentuated by Becky's ominous statement attributing her disappearance to a man with a magic hat and beard. A state of panic ensued as Deborah combed through every conceivable hiding spot, hoping to find Jessica playing hide and seek. Her efforts were futile, leading her to frantically search the surroundings of her home, eventually reporting Jessica missing at 9 a.m. The ensuing investigations by the Lexington County Sheriff's Department revealed no signs of a struggle nor any missing items from the house, apart from the papers scattered on the bedroom floor. The conjectures pointed to a potential kidnapper entering through the back window, abducting Jessica without waking her, and exiting through the front door. Search operations extended to the neighboring woods and abandoned structures in the predominantly rural area of Red Bank, especially rural back in 1986. The speculations, searches, and Becky's consistent statement about the man with the magic hat continued to haunt the family, embodying the relentless pursuit of truth and justice in the light of such grim circumstances. They searched many woods and areas with small streams and ponds for Jessica. Searches were made using off-road vehicles across large areas filled with nature. The sheriff's department sent a plane to fly over the area, hoping to find some trace of the girl, but none of the searches were successful. Deborah was taken to the sheriff's department to answer questions about what happened in the last 24 hours. She insisted she didn't know what happened to Jessica, but was sure about who did it. She blamed her ex-boyfriend for taking Jessica, but he said he didn't know where she was. The police also looked into Jessica's father, who was in California at the time. No charges were made against them. On June 7, the FBI and South Carolina law enforcement joined the search. Bulletins were sent nationwide. This was 10 years before the Amber Alert system and way before the internet era, so communication between departments could be slow and cumbersome. The sheriff's department tapped Deborah's phone to monitor all incoming and outgoing calls, in case someone called with ransom demands. The police told reporters they believed Jessica was taken from the mobile home and didn't walk away on her own. Weeks into the investigation, the detectives only had one physical clue found at the home. A fresh fingerprint was found on the open window at the back of the house, believed to be the point of entry on June 5. The fingerprint was sent to the FBI, but no matches were found. In September 1986, the sheriff in charge announced they had a suspect but didn't have enough proof to charge him. The suspect had failed a polygraph test, but since those aren't admissible in court, it wasn't enough for an arrest. After this, there were few glimmers of hope in the following years. In 1987, police in Kansas contacted the Lexington County Sheriff's Department, saying they had a girl matching Jessica's description. Deborah flew to Kansas hoping to see her daughter, but it wasn't Jessica. Deborah returned to South Carolina, determined to keep Jessica's case alive. She and the sheriff often disagreed about the case and argued over the investigation. Deborah decided to conduct her own investigation and keep Jessica's case in the public eye. In June 1989, Deborah told the state newspaper she had found fibers in an abandoned car connected to a family friend serving time in North Carolina for assault. This was a major revelation. 2 years earlier, Deborah had received a letter from an inmate in North Carolina claiming his cellmate had confessed to abducting and killing a 4-year-old child in 1986. The cellmate, Thomas McDowell, was a registered sex offender living in Lexington County at the time of Jessica's disappearance and was known to the Gutierrez family. Thomas claimed he had killed Jessica because she recognized him and said he had thrown her body into a landfill. Thomas also said he had a beard and was wearing a tall cowboy hat at the time of the abduction. Thomas' cellmate not only informed Deborah but also contacted the police with this information. This led investigators to extensively interrogate Thomas, who agreed to disclose every detail about the crime to the detectives. However, he demanded immunity in exchange. Of course, it wasn't a deal the state was willing to make, so he remained in prison in North Carolina, and Jessica's case officially went unresolved. Deborah felt frustrated and angry. In 1989, she told the state newspaper that it felt like they had no rights and that the system wasn't working for the victims. She was particularly upset that no charges were brought against Thomas. After all, he had confessed, and his version matched the events of June 5. But there was something even more surprising. Thomas's fingerprints were taken and found to match the fingerprint found on the Gutierrez family house window. In 2007, 21 years after Jessica's disappearance, Deborah publicly criticized a Lexington County Sheriff's Department and accused them of mishandling her daughter's case. She said that for years she had been afraid of what would happen if she dared to contradict the sheriff, a powerful figure in South Carolina. But after 2 decades, she wanted the case to move forward and knew she needed media attention to achieve it. Local news had access to a recorded telephone call between Deborah and the sheriff in June 1986, just a few days after Jessica's disappearance. In the call, recorded by the sheriff's department's wiretapping unit, Deborah argued with him about the case, concerned and demanding answers as he was pulling investigators off the search. The sheriff replied that he would give answers when he had them, and then threatened to pull all his agents off the case and send them home if she interfered with him. Of course, Deborah was angered by the sheriff's response, viewing it as a threat to her daughter's case. She asked him what the people who elected him would think if he abandoned Jessica, and he responded that they could elect him or not because he didn't really care what they did. In 2007, when the call transcript was made public, the sheriff said he remembered that Deborah had accused him of favoritism and not handling the case properly, and it had hurt his feelings. Deborah also expressed her frustration with prosecutor, indicating that she had been trying for years to get other agencies to take over the case, but he had not allowed it. The case was even reviewed by the prosecutor in 2007, but no action was taken to charge or prosecute any suspects. When consulted about it, he stated that most of the evidence was inadmissible, and the little that could serve had an explanation and a reasonable doubt. He also said that without a body, the state would need much more evidence to secure a conviction. After this, the case fell back into obscurity, but its main protagonists were generating their own headlines. In 2014, Sheriff James Metz was charged in federal court with 10 counts of bribery and wire fraud, for which he was sentenced to 12 months in prison. In 2016, prosecutor Donnie Myers was arrested for driving under the influence after crashing his car into a utility pole and abandoning the vehicle. He was fined $1,000 and retired from public service in 2017. In 2021, 35 years later, the case sparked renewed interest. Sheriff Jacob, who was elected to office after James went to prison, announced that the county would collaborate with the FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team to take a new look at Jessica's disappearance. In January 2022, finally, there was a breakthrough in the case. Police arrested 61-year-old Thomas Eric McDowell in connection with Jessica's disappearance. The subject, whom the child's mother had always suspected, was considered a person of interest in the case but was never followed up on. He resided in Lexington County in 1986. He was arrested at his home and confined to the county detention center. After the arrest, Thomas was charged with murder, kidnapping, and first-degree burglary for the disappearance and death of Jessica Gutierrez. Based on the arrest warrant media outlets have accessed, authorities identified a fingerprint of the suspect at the victim's house. However, it was not disclosed where the fingerprint was found or when it was identified as belonging to Thomas. Regardless, Deborah was aware of the existence of this fingerprint for years, and it was discovered on a window. For her, this was conclusive proof that he committed the crime, as she cleaned her windows every night, and only Jessica's kidnapper would have touched the glass afterward. In the same arrest warrant mentioned, authorities stated that the man was later identified in a photo lineup, and they also had evidence against him that he had told others he had kidnapped and killed the girl. After revisiting the case in 2021, special agents from the FBI and state prosecutors visited the area. Law enforcement agents from South Carolina assisted in interviewing over 125 people. The investigation was extensive, with over 3,500 pages of records reviewed, and 10 FBI field offices were involved in reviewing Jessica's case. The official statement indicated that the arrest was made possible thanks to many years of dedicated investigative work by local, state, and federal partners, as well as the determination of citizens who never forgot Jessica. Jessica's body has never been found, but perhaps this time, the subject will cooperate with authorities about the facts and disclose the location of the little girl. Deborah Gutierrez is still alive, but the long years waiting for answers have taken a toll on her. Her mental health has been affected by her daughter's disappearance, and this time it was Jessica's sister who spoke on her behalf after learning about the suspect's arrest. She said that her family never thought this day would come. She added that her mother fought tirelessly for 36 years for justice for Jessica, praying not only for a conviction, but also for the death penalty. She expressed gratitude on behalf of her family to everyone involved in the arrest of the man whom she described as an evil monster. Paradoxically, Thomas's neighbors considered him a quiet and reserved person who transported his work materials in a van and didn't seem to be a violent individual. Unfortunately, they will have to wait until the trial to find more answers. Apparently, Thomas has not admitted to the crime and has not disclosed what he did to Jessica. And that's the case for today. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, like, and share this video, it will help me continue creating content. See you in the next episode of Unreal True Crime. See you soon. Maria Elizabeth Ridulph was a 7-year-old girl who disappeared from Sycamore, Illinois, on December 3, 1957. Her remains were found almost 5 months later in a wooded area near Woodbine, Illinois, approximately 90 miles from her home. Maria was last seen by her friend on her neighborhood corner of Center Cross Street and Archie Place with an unknown man in his early 20s who called himself Johnny. Every day we coexist with evil. We witness the darkest side of human behavior. The suffering caused by one individual to others is something inherent in our society. As dedicated investigators of the criminal world, we're on a mission to uncover the most shocking crimes and get inside the minds of those who commit them. I am Lucas, and today I bring you another unreal true crime. The case of Maria Ridulph. Maria Ridulph was born on March 12, 1950, to the marriage of Michael and Frances Ivy Ridulph in Sycamore, Illinois. She was the youngest of their 4 children and had 2 sisters and a brother. While many residents lived or worked on farms in the area, her father Michael worked in one of Sycamore's few factories, and her mother Frances was a homemaker. At the time of her abduction, Maria was 7 years old, 1.10 meters tall, and weighed 24 kilograms, with dark brown hair and brown eyes. She was an honor student, then in the 2nd grade, and had also received awards for perfect attendance at Sunday school at John's Evangelical Lutheran Church. Maria was also described as sensitive and afraid of the dark. Her best friend was 8-year-old Kathy Sigmund, who lived on the same street as the Ridulphs. On the afternoon of December 3, 1957, Maria begged to be let out to play because it had started to snow. After dinner, Maria and her friend and neighbor Kathy Sigmund went out in the growing darkness as the sun had set, near Maria's house. They played a game they called dodging cars, running back and forth trying to avoid the lights of oncoming cars. According to Kathy, after a while, a man approached them, whom Kathy later described to the police as being around 20 years old and tall, with a thin chin, light hair, separated incisors, and wearing a colorful sweater. The man, who said his name was Johnny, asked the girls if they liked dolls and if they liked piggyback rides. He gave Maria a piggyback ride, after which she returned home and came back with one of her dolls to show him. After Maria went back, Kathy ran home to get her mittens, leaving Maria alone with the man. When Kathy returned, Maria and the man were no longer there. Kathy went to the Ridulphs' house to tell them she couldn't find her friend. Initially, the family thought Maria was hiding and sent Maria's 11-year-old brother to look for her. After he couldn't find her, the Ridulphs called the police, and within an hour, both police and armed civilians began a search in the town, but they couldn't locate Maria or Johnny, the man she was last seen with. The FBI, assuming that Maria might have been kidnapped across state lines, a federal crime, arrived in Sycamore within 2 days to assist local and state police in the search. The FBI and police interviewed numerous witnesses who had seen the 2 girls playing without anyone else present between 6:00 p.m. and 6:30 p.m. Based on these interviews, it was believed that Johnny had approached the girls after 6:30 p.m., and the FBI concluded that Maria was kidnapped between 6:45 and 7:00 p.m. Maria's disappearance received national media coverage, and both President Eisenhower and FBI Director John Edgar Hoover took an interest in the case. The police continued to investigate various suspects in the area, including passersby, known sex offenders, and a local man who had given children piggyback rides. But they didn't develop any solid leads. Maria's parents appeared on television, radio, and in the press, pleading for the safe return of their daughter and seeking the public's help in finding her. On April 26, 1958, near Woodbine, Illinois, approximately 100 miles from Sycamore, two tourists looking for mushrooms in a wooded area along U.S. Route 20 discovered the skeletal remains of a child wearing only an undershirt, shirt, and socks beneath a partially fallen tree. The state of decomposition indicated that the body had been there for several months. The body was identified as Maria Riddle through dental records, a lock of hair, and the clothing she had been wearing when she disappeared. Her coat, corduroy pants, underwear, and shoes were not found. There were no photographs taken of the crime scene, though photographs were taken of the general location without showing the body, because the coroner, James Furlong, did not want pictures of the remains to leak to the newspapers. Due to the crime having occurred within Illinois rather than crossing state lines, the FBI withdrew from the case and left it in the hands of state and local police. The initial autopsy could not determine the cause of death due to the advanced state of decomposition. On December 4th, investigators visited John Tessier's house as part of the search for Maria in the neighborhood. According to Tessier's stepsisters, their mother told the investigators that John Tessier had been home on the night of December 3rd, something they later testified was not true. Shortly thereafter, before Maria's body was found, the FBI investigated Tessier as a possible suspect. Sources differ on whether the investigation was triggered by a comment from a local resident or by John Tessier's parents themselves, trying to divert suspicion from their son when they realized he had the same name and general description as Johnny. Tessier and his parents told FBI investigators that on December 3, 1957, Tessier was in Rockford, Illinois, about 40 miles northwest of Sycamore, to enlist in the Air Force. This story differed from his mother's earlier statement, as reported by her daughters, that Tessier had been at home all night. He said he had been in Chicago on December 2nd and 3rd undergoing the required physical exams for his enlistment. On the morning of December 3rd, he visited the Chicago recruiting office, which was corroborated by records, and then spent the day sightseeing in Chicago before returning to Rockford by train that evening, arriving there at 6:45 p.m. Upon arriving in Rockford, he called his parents to ask them to pick him up and take him home to Sycamore since he had taken the train to and from Chicago and had left his own car at home. Later, telephone records were found showing that a collect call had been made from the Rockford post office to the Tessier home at 6:57 p.m. that evening by someone who gave their name as John Tessier, as written by the operator. After making the call, Tessier met with officials at the Rockford recruiting office to drop off paperwork related to his enlistment. Officers confirmed that they spoke with Tessier around 7:15 p.m. that evening, although one officer also expressed some concerns about Tessier's credibility and behavior. Tessier was taken to the police station to take a lie detector test, which he passed. Based on his alibi and the lie detector test results, Tessier was removed from the list of suspects, and the FBI closed their report on December 10, 1957. In 1997, with no significant leads, Sycamore Police Lieutenant Patrick Soler closed the Riddle case, which was 40 years old at the time, and named William Henry Redmond, a former truck driver and carnival worker from Nebraska who had died in 1992, as the likely man who had abducted and murdered the girl. Redmond had been accused in 1988 of the 1951 murder of an 8-year-old Pennsylvania girl, although that case was dismissed when a police officer refused to reveal the name of a confidential informant. Redmond was also a suspect in the 1951 disappearance of 10-year-old Beverly Potts in Ohio. The case was reopened in 2008 based on new information from McCullough's half-sister, Janet Tessier. According to Janet, her mother, Eileen Tessier, on her death in January 1994, had said, "John did it. John did it. Those two girls and the one who disappeared. You have to tell someone." Janet interpreted the statement to mean that her half-brother John Tessier, who would soon change his name to Jack McCullough, had kidnapped and killed Maria Ridulph. John, or Jack McCullough, as he was known at that time, allegedly once threatened to kill Janet with a gun and sexually abused his half-sister Jean when she was 14. He was separated from the Tessier family at the time of his mother Eileen's death, and he was told not to attend her funeral. Janet Tessier said that she made several unsuccessful attempts over the next 14 years to get law enforcement, including the Sycamore Police and the FBI, to investigate her mother's statement. State police investigators reviewed the evidence and developed a new timeline in which Tessier could have kidnapped Maria and driven to Rockford in time to make a phone call at 6:57 p.m. and meet with the recruiting officers at 7:15 p.m. Under this new timeline, they determined that Maria would have been kidnapped no later than 6:20 p.m. The police search for Maria had started at 7 p.m. according to Catherine, who said she had returned home from a party at 7 p.m. and found the search had begun. Hoping that Kathy Chapman, formerly Sigmund, would review a series of yearbook photographs, the police took 5 group photos from the Sycamore High School yearbook of 1957. But John Tessier's photo was not in the yearbook because he had been expelled. The police obtained a contemporary photo of him from his ex-girlfriend, which differed from the yearbook photos in that Tessier was wearing a shirt instead of a suit, and the background was dark instead of light. Chapman identified Tessier's photo. Along with the picture, Tessier's former girlfriend at the time of the crime provided an unused military train ticket from Rockford to Chicago dated December 1957. Investigators took this to suggest that, contrary to Tessier's alibi, he did not take the train on his trip to Chicago and instead drove there, which means he could have returned to Sycamore on the afternoon of December 3, kidnapped Maria, and driven to Rockford. In July 2011, the Seattle Police Department, which had joined the Illinois State Police in the investigation, brought McCullough in for questioning. At first, McCullough spoke calmly and cooperated, but when asked about the murder of Maria Ridulph and his whereabouts on the night of the crime, he became evasive and aggressive. After McCullough refused to answer more questions, he was arrested for the kidnapping and murder of Maria Ridulph and extradited to Illinois. Maria's body was exhumed that same month to look for evidence of possible intruder DNA, but none could be found. However, a forensic anthropologist discovered that Maria had been stabbed in the throat at least 3 times with a sharp object. The news of the arrest in a 54-year-old murder case garnered national attention. In the September 2012 trial, the prosecution argued that McCullough was attracted to Maria and decided to kidnap her, but ended up taking her life. They presented new autopsy reports suggesting that Maria had been fatally wounded. 3 inmates who had been incarcerated with McCullough testified that he had talked about killing Maria. However, their stories were inconsistent. One inmate said McCullough talked about strangling Maria with a wire, while another claimed McCullough accidentally suffocated her while trying to prevent her from screaming. The defense argued that the prosecutors and police were pressured by the Ridulph and Tessier families to solve the case and implicate McCullough, even though there was no physical evidence, motive, or indication that McCullough was in the area when Maria was kidnapped. McCullough did not take the stand in his own defense, following his lawyer's advice. On September 14, 2012, McCullough was found guilty of the kidnapping and murder of Maria Ridulph and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. He was 73 years old at the time of the sentencing. In 2015, McCullough, acting pro se, representing himself, filed a post-conviction petition seeking to overturn his murder conviction. After the court initially dismissed McCullough's petition as frivolous and without merit, the public defender who had originally represented McCullough at trial and had continued to investigate the case while staying in contact with McCullough, despite no longer being appointed to represent him, asked the court to reconsider the dismissal. In response to the motions, the county's state prosecutor, Richard Schmack, who had replaced Clay Campbell in that position, conducted a thorough review of the evidence. This led Schmack to conclude that McCullough could not have committed the crime and was, in fact, innocent. According to Schmack, there was no evidence presented at the trial that clearly established McCullough's whereabouts on the night of Maria Ridulph's abduction and supported his alibi. In particular, Illinois Bell telephone records showed that McCullough had made a collect call to his mother that night from a payphone in downtown Rockford, rather than from Sycamore, as alleged in his trial. Given the timing of the phone call, the approximately 40-mile distance between Sycamore and Rockford, and the icy road conditions, Schmack concluded that McCullough could not have been in Sycamore at the time of Maria Ridulph's disappearance. On April 15, 2016, an Illinois Circuit Court judge overturned McCullough's original conviction and sentence and ordered a new trial. McCullough, who still faced charges, was released on bail that day pending the new trial. McCullough was declared innocent of the crime by the DeKalb County Circuit Court on April 12, 2017. And with that, dear listener, we conclude today's case. I look forward to joining you again as we delve into the intricate details of some of history's most dreadful crimes. Until next time on Unreal True Crime, farewell.